Informative. So once again, thank you very much for participating. I'm David Terrell, one of the co-chairs of the Trust. And we're going to start with Fiona, who's going to give us a brief history of the Trust. Fiona.
Welcome to everybody. It's great to see so many people here and to really, for us to know that there's such a lot of interest in this subject. So I'm just going to start with a sort of brief setting the scene really, because almost 10 years ago, I'm a journalist, Fiona Miller from The Guardian, and I was asked to go and meet a group of head teachers who'd come together via Twitter because they were very concerned about some things that were going on in education policy. Specifically, their concerns were around the qualifications reforms that were going on at the time, the failure for the curriculum and qualifications to meet the full needs of pupils, and especially some of the pupils with special educational needs and in alternative provision, which I think we too often forget about, the impact of accountability on school decision making, and the lack of attention to high quality alternative vocational pathways. Now, as a result of that article that I wrote, the group formed itself into the Head Teachers Roundtable, and Tom subsequently joined. And in their first policy platform, as it were, they came forward with the idea, and this was really ahead of its time actually, that rather than the English Baccalaureate qualification that Michael Gove was proposing, the group should propose a real baccalaureate qualification, in other words, a grouped award for 18+ students to be taken at the end of school, which would encompass more than just academic qualifications, not just vocational pathways, but also things like personal service, civic engagement, arts, creativity, Duke of Edinburgh, all those sorts of things. And at the time, this was quite ambitious thinking. And it was also, at one stage, it was talking about pushing the whole thing back to the start of primary school. So the whole primary curriculum would be geared towards this endpoint. And I can remember there were meetings with primary heads as well. It was so ahead of its time that it didn't really quite go anywhere. And I think it's fair to say that at the time, after Michael Gove left the Department for Education, the appetite for reform was quite dimmed, and schools were very, very preoccupied with implementing the quite radical changes he'd brought in. Meanwhile, the group formed itself into a little trust, the National Baccalaureate Trust, which is the group that's brought forward this event today. And what's more significant, and you'll hear more about this later on, some schools started to pilot this idea. And so even though it appears like not much has been going on for the past 10 years, it has been going on in some schools, which is in a way proof that this sort of structural change could work. Now, fast forward to today, and of course, there is suddenly this appetite for change. Why is there? Well, I suppose that's partly because schools have got the last set of reforms kind of under their belt. But I think more importantly, the pandemic has shown us a lot of flaws in our existing system, which some of us knew already. And if you go back to the original points that the Head Teachers Roundtable were making, they're still there. You know, so people are still concerned about qualifications reform. They're still concerned about the gap, which is now, of course, widening rather than narrowing. The impacts of accountability on school decision making, and also the lack of attention to vocational pathways. And I think one of the things that's happened as a result of the pandemic is a much wider audience of people, including heads, teachers and parents and students themselves, are starting to realise that the system is too heavily weighted in favour of exams. So when you pull the exams out, there's actually nothing there, and people just you created chaos really. And that to me says that you could actually create a system where, you know, forms of assessment are broader than simply exams. And also schools are now struggling with a wider agenda, which is not just making up for lost learning for some children, but making up for, you know, their emotional, psychological development and feelings of safety and so on. So that all points to the need for a much broader way of assessing what it is that pupils do well and valuing the things that have been undervalued in the past few years. The other thing I think we ought to just acknowledge, even though it's not strictly an issue for us, is that the external political context in terms of the levelling up agenda and Brexit has pushed the whole vocational qualifications issue and skills to the fore. We've seen that in the Queen's speech this week. So that presents another opportunity for some of the arguments that the National Baccalaureate Trust is making to be put forward, because it, you know, I think the model that we're presenting does provide a way of raising the status of vocational qualifications and ensuring that young people who do those qualifications don't leave school feeling like they're sort of second-class citizens. Now, I can see all the pitfalls as a journalist and someone who was once involved in politics, and some of the arguments. You know, people are already saying, oh, you can't abolish GCSEs. Well, we're not saying that. And I think that's going to become apparent as this meeting rolls on. And they'll also say this is a form of dumbing down. You know, you're too touchy-feely, you know, caring about emotions and softer skills and things like that. However, nobody says that about the IEP diploma or about its careers, vocational alternatives. So I think this is a key moment for potential change, which is why this meeting is important, and it's why everybody who can respond to the consultation will, I hope, get their voices fed into the next stage of the process. And I'm just going to wind up by just pointing out two key paragraphs from Tom's document that he's drafted that we're going to be discussing today. Too many young people, especially those judged to be at the lower end of the attainment range, are denied the opportunity to leave school with a fair record of their success and achievements, however hard they work. And too often, young people's educational careers are defined solely in terms of the collection of exam results, often in a narrow range of disciplines and with inadequate regard for technical education, creative learning, and personal development. And now is the time to broaden our understanding of education so that all our young people are properly equipped to thrive in the 21st century. I can't think of a better way of now handing over to Tom for him to spell out in a bit more detail how this would work in practice. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fiona. It's brilliant to have that introduction, and it's really good to know that there's been a kind of connection to something that's happened a while ago, because one of the things that we discuss extensively in the National Baccalaureate Trust is the fact that there have been numerous attempts over the years to develop a baccalaureate, and one of the messages from one of our trustees, Ken Spores, is that we need to learn lessons from that process. So, for example, the famous Tomlinson report from 2004, which a lot of people had lots of hopes for, didn't get enacted, and there are reasons why. So what we're doing at the moment is that we're launching this consultation so that we get feedback from people about their ideas about a baccalaureate before we say, okay, this is what we think we should do. And the reason we're doing that is because we feel like we're quite serious about this. We're not sort of floating a kind of extreme sort of model to say, this is a nice idealized version. We want this to actually happen and become policy. And so in order for that to happen, we need to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that were made in the past, to overprescribe something where there's not the right appetite for it. And so this is not the launch event of the proposals. That will come later. We're at the moment seeking views. So this event is really just to sort of set out the parameters for that process so that you can then feed into it. And we've got lots of organizations who are part of this webinar now, but are going to be linking into it over the next few months, as we then write up a more formal report which says this is what we think a government could do, and hopefully with cross-party support, because it will take that time. So I'm going to share some slides now. So let me just talk through the basic idea here. So first of all, just to get a sense of the time scale, we have a time scale which is this. Here we are launching, and we're going to take until October to gather views. And you might think that's a long time, but we recognise that there's the summer term. A lot of schools are worried about tags and stuff like that in the secondary schools in England, and so there'll be some people who haven't quite got the kind of headspace to think about it then yet. And then there will be the summer holidays, and then so we need another window, sort of gathering views early in the autumn, and then we'll be looking to write something. And we feel it's important to give maximum time for people to engage before we sort of start setting out a sort of formal set of proposals. And then we'll show people an interim view of it in October, November, and then have a final report, which would then be the thing which hopefully informs another wave of discussion. So it's slow and steady, and that's our experience. We've been trying to promote this idea for a while, and that is our experience. There is no point in rushing because circumstances change. COVID came along, and as Fiona correctly pointed out, what we realized early on was that schools were so preoccupied with implementation of the existing reforms, there was very low appetite for a whole nother level of it at that moment. So that's the process, that's the time frame. And I've put it in the chat for the session, but also you can see the links here. We'll put them out multiple ways. Read the document, and the consultation form, which I'll show you in a minute, is embedded in that document. It's at various places. You just click on it. It's a Google form, and there are different ways of responding. We've already had lots of responses already, which is great. So what are the problems we're trying to solve with the National Baccalaureate? What is it? Well, basically, I mean, I can talk briefly to all of these, and you can read some of these in the materials, but we do think this is an important thing. There's a structure and balance of the system at the moment. Currently, we have a system where, even though we're trying to encourage students to stay on in education until 18, going through schools, going 11 to 18 schools to sixth forms or to further education colleges, doing technical qualifications or apprenticeships, we still have this enormous structure at 16, which is very, very heavy and got a lot of content in it. And we feel that creates an imbalance, which then leads to pathways which are not equitable beyond that. And if you want to have an education system which says we're in it till we're 18, it seems bizarre not to have a terminal qualification or structure which focuses on that and allows children or students to progress towards that at different ways and different sort of pathways, but with that thing at the end. And that's an important thing. The breadth and coherence of those pathways, as I'll show you in a minute, some students' experiences are very, very shallow compared to others. They don't have the same opportunities. And because of the structure being there at 16, it does have various perverse sort of consequences further down into secondary schools, which I'm going to discuss. If we take that away, we feel there'll be sort of an opening up becomes possible. Diversity of assessment modes, because of the need to have national level accountability of all schools at 16 and the need for there to be high validity in those exams because of the concerns about grade inflation and so on. We've narrowed down the modes of assessment to very much exam based and very, very few areas for other modes of assessment, which have been seen to be either highly gamed in some people's views or not sufficiently reliable. And so we've got a very exam focused system. Now, we're not against exams at all. It's just that we feel there needs to be a rebalancing. And so within each subject and each component of a qualification, we need to look at how different assessment modes can be included so that students have more opportunities to demonstrate what they can do. But that then has implications for the accountability system and the whole structure. So we need to look at these things together. The technical academic divide is, in the responses we've had so far, I shouldn't prejudge what you say, but it's the most sort of universally agreed on thing in the whole process is this. It's almost like everybody who's responded so far agrees that this is something which is present and unacceptable, that we still do have the poor relation of technical vocational education alongside academic. And that's implicit in some of the institutions that we have, but also in the qualifications framework and the wraparound opportunities that students get, and the point at which they start being able to diverge. There's a debate to have about all students having access to an academic education, but also giving value to high quality technical education, and that's subtle. At the moment, it's, some FE courses, as I'll show you, they're not able to provide the same level of kind of whole holistic education that some schools can provide. And even in terms of funding and so on, there's all sorts of disparities. There's no real formal recognition of personal development. Now, it's ad hoc. We have lots of government ministers over the years have promoted character education, for example. David Cameron he's prided himself on having introduced the National Citizen Service, and it's not a bad thing in itself. But it's not for everybody. It's sort of get it if you can, and it's very piecemeal, and it has no place in the whole structure of our qualifications. We talk about measuring what we value, but actually we don't. We value what we measure at the moment in our system. It's totally dominated by exams, and everything else that students do is sort of by the by. And to be honest with you, some universities don't help. If you apply to a university like Cambridge, for example, they don't even want to know that stuff. They're not even interested. They just want to know your academic stuff, and that's it. So at various levels, personal development, which we'd say we'd value, is left to chance in the system, and it has no recognition in our system. In other international systems, it is given validity. So finally, we feel that there's one of the things that the National Baccalaureate will deal with is that currently there are so many elements to this to change and tweak. People don't know where to start. So do we start talking about reforming GCSEs, or dealing with the FE situation, or trying to broaden the modes of assessment? There's so many different parts of the piece. And so nothing ever changes because it feels too complicated. One of the things that we think we're providing is a kind of umbrella to have step change, gradual change rather, incremental change, which an evolving system, and I'll explain that in a second. So this is one of the things that we see. This is what I mean by the disparity. This is the sorts of different learner pathways. You might have someone, and sometimes I think some policymakers and some people who kind of advocate the status quo imagine that every student has this sort of top left experience. They can do 4 A levels in some schools. They can do even 5. There's breadth. They can do the EPQ qualification alongside 4 A levels. They can do 10 GCSEs, which is lots, and so that feels good. They can do all these other awards. So some schools offer that, and you might think, if in the current system every student can get all of that and do all of those things, why would you want to change that? So there is a kind of investment for some people who offer that currently, think, well, don't threaten that. And this is one of the challenges we've got with the reform process. If you threaten providers who provide that now and say, we're taking that away from you, they will object, because why would you want to give up a system which allows you to deliver that to your students? So a lot of independent schools and grammar schools, for example, sorry, I've gone a slide ahead, who provide that type of breadth, will fight to keep it. Of course they would. I mean, it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. It's high quality. And to be honest with you, it sets the standard. The breadth of experience some children get in our system is exceptional. And the point is that not everybody gets it. A more typical experience would be 3 A levels, even at A level. And, that's 3 separate subjects and nothing else, no EPQ, nothing else. And that's really what we're funded for in sixth forms. And maybe they've done 8 GCSEs and bits of stuff which have no formal recognition. So this is a more typical kind of academic qualifications route. And even that isn't that wide in terms of personal development. It's focused on some qualifications, and for 8 GCSEs, then following to subjects in the same subjects at advanced level is quite narrow, I would say, and so many other people would. And then you've got this ad hocery of the kind of additional things that students can do. Some schools have breadth of provision in terms of personal development opportunities, clubs and societies and activities and residentials and trips. Other schools offer almost nothing, or the take-up of them is low, especially with disadvantaged students because they can't afford to take part. When you go into the technical and vocational area, again, there's a patchwork of experience across FE. If you go talk to FE colleges, I mean, in terms of finances and so on, they barely have the funding to offer a kind of 18-hour course. And if they do maths and English, the time for that comes out of the time for their core provision. It's not extra. And the idea that they could suddenly start teaching lots of other things as well seems perverse to some people, because they barely have the resources to deal with the core qualifications. And for a student who's got a BTEC level 2, that might be the only thing that they'd study at post-16, having got some low-grade qualifications. And I think about do you think this represents somebody's full education? They've been in full-time education until they're 17. They've done a 1-year BTEC. They've got a handful of qualifications. It's not a fair representation of someone's entire time at school. And the difference between the top left and the bottom right there is so massive. It can't be right that that's what we'd offer in our system. It can't be right that that's all there is. Now, we think a baccalaureate is a universal thing. It's for everybody. I'm just going to talk about some of the problems first before we come to the solutions aspect of it. One of the things that happens because we have this big exam heavy system at 16 is that we have things that happen like this. So schools think, and by the way, you don't have to see the detail of this image, but it's just a sort of talking point that there are multiple models of secondary curriculums. And one of the debates that goes on is, should we have a 4-year key stage, a 3-year key stage 4, or a 2-year? Now, why would you run a 3-year key stage 4? It's so that you've got maximum run-in to the exams, because the exams are the thing that matter. So you have schools doing this where you end up with 3 years to study for a GCSE, because that's got high stakes. And because of that, you condense key stage 3 into 2 years. And in this model here, the reason I highlight these two is because in school A, they literally do, if you drop history and you don't study it to GCSE, you get twice the amount of time to do history in this school than in school B, literally double. So you've got these perverse incentives going on where schools, because they're concerned about student outcomes at 16, they squeeze down the breadth that goes out of their key stage 3 as well. And that's so unnecessary. This school is a bit more confident with its provision at key stage 4. So they're given it 2 years, which is ample time. And so they have more time to do the breadth of subjects at key stage 3. That's healthier. And of course, a lot of people would argue that a strong key stage 3 is a platform for this. But in a fully scoped 14 to 18 model, we wouldn't need to be having these conversations because we don't end at 16, we carry on. So we need to think about what a baccalaureate is. Now, a baccalaureate is people sometimes ask me, why are you calling it that and not a diploma and so on? Well, a baccalaureate really just means an award or qualification which is more than the sum of its parts, which all of the components add up to a whole. That's what it is. A baccalaureate means you are given your final award, you are judged to have succeeded if you complete the whole program. And that logo that we had designed essentially means that. It's a kind of laurel wreath, your achievement of all the parts adding up together. So if we had a baccalaureate for England, we would be talking about completing the baccalaureate. So everyone will be aiming to complete the National Baccalaureate for England. And there will be lots of different ways to do that. And there could be all sorts of requirements to complete. But that would be the way people would view it. And a bit like in America, they talk about graduating from high school, and the same in Australia and in the IB. We finish the IB, we complete it. We complete it as a whole. And that's the most important thing. That's a universal thing. So every single student in the whole country is aiming to complete the National Baccalaureate. In itself, that's very unifying because it's wherever you go, whatever type of learning program you're doing, we have this common aim. And that to me is massively empowering in terms of setting people's standards high. What we're talking about is the best model that there is internationally of this is obviously the International Baccalaureate. And I say best because it's lasted a long time. It has high recognition, high status, and it works at a number of different levels in lots of different contexts. So what we're really talking about is a kind of inclusive IB for England. That's the kind of way sometimes I explain it to people. And why I mean inclusive? Because it needs to cater for all learners, and it needs to have technical and vocational pathways and academic pathways side by side. And of course, there is the career certificate approach to the IB. But the IB works because it includes subjects which are taught as disciplines. It has a unifying philosophy which drives it and links it all together. It's got a kind of component of theory of knowledge which links it together. It's got this international mindedness philosophy which links it together. But it's also got non-examined components, the creativity, action and service component, which lots of schools and colleges deliver in different ways. And there's a kind of quality assurance aspect to that, but basically centres decide this is what we do for our CAS, and the students have to complete a certain volume of activity to have passed, but it's not graded, it just has to be done. And that's a very powerful model, that you don't have to get graded on everything for it to matter. You can't get the IB unless you complete the CAS. It's part of the whole baccalaureate. And of course, then there's a project. Every student gets a personal selection of a project, or in this case, the extended essay, which can have lots of different formats. So you do an extended essay, you write about theory of knowledge, and you do your CAS as well as your academic subjects or your career certificates. And that adds up to something big. So the whole matters more than the individual components at one level. But of course, the components are important for different sort of people who are interested in what you've done. So why can't we have that for England? Well, we could. Now, the National Baccalaureate for England is essentially a formula for, for looking at. So you need some sort of key principles, and some of our documentation, you can look at this. So, I mean, we've chosen to sort of follow the developments in Scotland and Wales, not because we think we're trying to sort of match them in terms of anything, except if there's an opportunity to unify systems within the UK, you might as well take it. So both of those systems have a sort of capacities aspect. And so we've defined some. And this is part of the consultation. Do you think these things are helpful? You know, why wouldn't you want every single student in the country to want to be ambitious, knowledgeable and inquiring, to be enterprising and creative, to be responsible, principled, informed citizens, healthy, confident? I mean, that's just, it's like, of course that's what you want. But at the moment, not everybody gets a chance to develop all those capacities all the way through to 18, and we think they should be able to. So what is the National Baccalaureate we're proposing have in it? Well, it's a national certificate post-18, so everyone would be aiming for it. That's the one thing. It's an umbrella award, so which means that it's bigger than the sum of its parts. The components we'll talk about in a second, and it comes with a transcript. And this is an important feature. That and I'll show you an example in a second. There are digital transcripts established in different systems, and we feel that really what this is a transcripting process, that by the end of 18, every student has a standard format transcript, which anyone, a university, an employer, can look at and say, oh, what did you do for your baccalaureate? And every student would have that, and it would describe the content of their baccalaureate. It's universal for all. We keep saying this, but this is so important. It's not the big disparity. The content might vary, but every single student has the opportunity to achieve the baccalaureate. It's structured so that, we're going to talk about this in a second, so that you might have to have different stages, because one of the things that we need to look at is institutions. And we've got 11 to 16 schools, as well as 11 to 18 schools. We've got sixth form colleges, FE colleges. We've got a whole range of apprenticeship providers. And so we need to have a system which is flexible to cope with those institutional variations, unless we're really saying this won't happen until we change every institution in the country, which seems unrealistic. And it also needs to be a mixture of assessed components and non-assessed components. And finally, it's tiered. Now, we think there's a standard to this. So it's quite common already in the language of assessment and qualifications in England to have entry level, foundation, intermediate and advanced. And that could apply to the baccalaureate. So you, just like level 1, 2 and 3, an entry level, you could get a level 1 baccalaureate or a level 2 baccalaureate or a level 3 by the time you finish, depending on the level of qualifications and components that you took. And that's important. Otherwise, people will think you're just giving prizes to everybody, and you've got that type of language comes in. And of course, we're not saying that. We're saying that a level 1 a student maybe who's had some learning challenges and is aspiring. I've met some phenomenal young people in FE colleges who are striving to complete their level 1 qualification. And it's a massive achievement for them to reach that at 18. Now, why shouldn't they have that same sense of fulfillment and reward for having gained the National Baccalaureate at level 1, as well as someone who's done a standard academic route? Of course, they should have that entitlement, because they are equal as people, and they should have that same sense of achievement. And a National Baccalaureate with tiers would achieve that. And we think in then doing that, it would be internationally comparable. You'd have the IB, you'd have the French bac, the Spanish one, high school graduation in the US, and the English National Baccalaureate. It would mean the same, and people would understand it in those terms. Now, as Fiona alluded to, we did start trialing this. You know, at a very basic level, a baccalaureate has core learning, the core subjects that you study, the main content that you're taught, that you get examined in, that you strive to complete. You have a personal project aspect, so something you choose to pursue, and that can be part of it. And a personal development program where you think about sporting activities, community service, arts engagement. All of those things can be wrapped into the baccalaureate. Universal for everybody. So it would be a case of saying, what was your core learning? What did you do for your personal project? What was in your personal development program? And those questions could be asked of every single student, and there could be an answer. But it also means for providers, you're saying, what core learning modules and units and qualifications do we offer? How do we support personal projects for everybody? And how does that get integrated for apprentices, for example? And what scope of personal development program is available to everybody in our organisation so that they can complete the baccalaureate? That becomes the question. Now, Steve Wilshaw, who's one of our co-chairs in his school, his trust that he's been working for, they developed this as part of our pilot process. It's absolutely superb baccalaureate, the Priory Baccalaureate. And we are encouraging schools to say, take it and make it your own. So rather than it being the National Baccalaureate at the Priory, it was like the Priory Baccalaureate. And I would still promote that for anyone, the school baccalaureate, the ex-academy baccalaureate. So it feels like it's yours, even though it's part of the National Baccalaureate system. And within that, you know, you can see there's a transcript aspect of it here. And then the main page to show you is this. For their personal development program, students in the sixth form had a certain number of hours. They had to do 120 hours, creative, cultural, community, physical well-being, learning and leadership, and a certain number of hours for all of those. And in completing that, plus their, in this particular case, the A-levels and the EPQ, that adds up to a solid program, totally the same standards and richness as the IB in an English school. That's what we want for everybody, that type of experience. And it's achievable. So the baccalaureate we need to discuss, one of the core questions that comes up is this. We could just stick with what we've got. We could say to schools now, a policy group or a government could say, we're going to introduce a National Baccalaureate. And basically what it is we take existing qualifications, but we're going to make it more wraparound, and we're going to have recognised things that we already offer, the National Citizen Service, Duke of Edinburgh Award, a whole range of really high quality, well-established arts and sports awards, which are, why would you get rid of those things? They're really good, they're well-established, they've got recognition. It's just about making them accessible to everyone. And also, we do have A-levels, GCSEs, and a whole range of very technical and very sort of industry-specific qualifications, which are already well-established. To imagine taking all those things out and putting a whole new set of things in, the inertia in front of that is huge. So we think we need to create a vehicle for saying, well, we can establish the baccalaureate as a notion, as a vehicle now with what we already have. We don't need to change everything. Other people think we do. And this is one of the things we want to consult on. Other people think, no, build it from the beginning. And this is what the Tomlinson report essentially was trying to do. All the components are different, the subject units. So Tomlinson was talking about, say, 5 main subjects post-16 rather than 3. So you'd have to reform all the qualification specs, all the modes of assessment, a sort of big bang change. And so to get support for that is a much more difficult process, and so far has failed every time. Our view in our group is that won't ever happen, given the current politics and so on. It's sort of never land. It could be imagined, but it's unrealistic. This model is more realistic and could then evolve. So our view is probably that if we start with what we have and then start saying, so once we've got the baccalaureate, we don't have to do so many GCSEs. We don't have to start prescribing how many there are. We can start saying, well, we don't have to do so many. We can start evolving the system more and start imagining other ways. So we don't have to scrap GCSEs to have a baccalaureate. In fact, and this is my own personal view, I actually believe that every time an organisation allows itself to have the headline scrap GCSEs. They've made it harder to achieve change because people who already feel that GCSEs deliver something of quality are on the defensive. And it's a tactical error, if nothing else. But also, it's unnecessary. The question is, how many GCSEs, in which subjects, and the mode of assessment for the GCSE, maybe that could change. Because if we've got a baccalaureate that counts more than the individual qualifications, we don't need an exam in every subject to have validity. It's just no longer necessary. So we need to be a bit more imaginative about the process. And once maybe down the line we have a baccalaureate established, we can start saying, well, let's look at the component parts more thoroughly. That's just one of the suggestions, and we want feedback on that in the consultation. It's one of the questions we're asking. Another question that comes up is about 11 to 16 schools. And this is an important thing. Now, have we got the capacity in our system to reform the institutions in our system? 11 to 16 schools, I don't know how many there are off the top of my head, but there are many of them. And some whole systems are 11 to 16 schools and a sixth form college. And that's the whole way the system is. To imagine that changing is almost long-grassing reform. You're basically saying, forget it, because it's impossible to imagine that being done. What's the incentive just for a different type of framework when it's not necessary? So we think the opposite is important, to engineer a system which fits the current institutions. And so essentially you would need a two-stage approach. You'd need to allow 11 to 16 schools to progress all the way through to that everyone's aiming to finish at 18. But also for 11 to 16 schools to have some sort of contribution to make, an important one, to a baccalaureate. And the way to do that is to give it two stages, to have a transition and to sort of have a baccalaureate which has a part 1 and a part 2 if necessary. So you contribute to the baccalaureate at various stages, and then 11 to 16 schools have to passport all their students through to the next stage so that the baccalaureate can be finished. But it won't have been finished until they finish their post-16 part, their part 2. So that's one of the bits of thinking. But everyone's aiming for the final award here at 18, universally. Some students will have got part of their baccalaureate from their 11 to 16 school and part of it in their college or sixth form. And some students would have completed the whole thing in their school because that's what the school was like. If we don't have that type of thinking, we're at the same time we're saying let's have a baccalaureate, we're saying let's change all our institutions. And you're asking a lot of people to change the entire configuration of the system. And that's, in policy terms, unlikely to happen. The history of this sort of reform means that it's very, very unlikely to happen. So we might as well not be talking about it. So let's have a look at what it would look like. So I've made these. Now I have to say these are mine. I sketched these out. You could do your own. I mean, that's quite fun to do. You can sketch out your ideal back. So here's what it might look like. This could be with this part 1, part 2, 11 to 16 bridging into a sixth form college, or all delivered in one 11 to 18 school. We take the back being progressed through from year 10 to year 13. You can imagine changing things around so that we have maths every year in a small slimline unit. We could start thinking about, for example, some assessments in maths, which aren't GCSEs anymore, but they're kind of online assessments using adaptive testing or whatever. Every year, students could get great piano exams. They've done grade 5, then grade 6, then grade 7. We could reimagine maths exams, very doable. That could come later. We could, instead of saying scrap GCSEs, we could say instead of GCSE maths, we just study maths every year and it could be integrated into a baccalaureate. English could be continued to study. And there's a discussion to have about, should everybody continue the study of English all the way through to their finished school? Some people think yes. That's one of the questions in our consultation. Some people think no, if they've reached a certain standard by 16, you don't have to carry it on. Advanced programs. Now I've shown 3 boxes here. Some people think they should be more. Depends how big they are. But currently we could use A levels as a unit and not have to change them, and they could stay the same. Down the line, they could be changed. In this section here, you've got a range of different size boxes. You've got long, thin courses. You've got short, fat courses. Once you take away this enormous weight of assessment at 16, you can start saying, well, why do we have to have exams at the end? Maybe we'll finish a unit in year 10, we finish a unit in year 11, and that means I could do history and then some geography. Like in America, they choose credits every year. And why do you have to do everything for 2 years? Why do we have to, why we could make it so that everyone continues study history, the history of the world or their country or whatever, all the way through. Why do we have children dropping the study of history at the end of year 8? It's bizarre to me that that is the case, that we have that in our country, that you would stop studying history aged 13. But we do, we allow that. But also these qualifications could be much more different. They could evolve into different things than we are now, but they could also be what we do now. So we could start with what we have now and gradually evolve from here, more interesting ways. And the modes of assessment across these subjects could be all different types of things, because the accountability pressure isn't on all of them having maximum validity. It's on the entire program having integrity and value as a whole program. And importantly, the personal development program runs all the way through it, all the way through. We're talking about sport, music, arts, community service, all sorts of different unit sizes, accredited or non-accredited. You don't have to assess it all. You don't have to have a scale of how kind you are or some kind of measure. You just do things. I went on a residential, I climbed a mountain, I did 15 hours of community service at the old people's home. I was in the orchestra, I played sport. I designed a computer game. And that's part of my portfolio of things that I've done. And every student has that. Every student has that opportunity to express themselves through what they did alongside their core program. It's all there for the taking. Some schools offer that already, but the truth is that so many students do not get what other children do get. That's the problem. There's excellence in our system. It's just not remotely universal. An FE technical route. Here you've got this thing of, sorry, keep flicking my mouse here. What if you go to college and you're doing a big high volume single subject thing like plumbing or hair and beauty or performing arts? There is value in that. Some people think that's too narrow, but some of those programs are big and they've got lots of components to them. And there's a tradition of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, if you go to an FE college and see a level 3 program of students learning to be, you know, electricians or plumbers, and they're partly, you know, doing apprentice-based work and then 1 day a week in college, that route is strong. And to start saying all of those students also need to do 5 subjects at that age, well, it's not appropriate really. And it's not, again, people aren't going to want to change to that. But what those students can still be getting is a baccalaureate, because their technical program, which with links to industry, is part of the same framework as their friends who are doing 3 A levels and going to university. And it's unifying. So it's easy to imagine wrapping around high quality technical education linked to employment into the baccalaureate structure alongside others. So that's how we see it working together. That route and the other route are sort of different, but they're part of the same program, and the language of completing the baccalaureate would be universal. Again, this could be level 1, level 2, level 3. And once the baccalaureate model is established, we can start talking about the components. My experience is that this strand of personal development for some students is woefully thin, if it's present at all. And if they've already got their maths and English GCSEs to grade 4, they're not even doing that. For some students, this box is the only one they're doing. And I think that's inadequate. It's not enough. It's not fair. And a baccalaureate would allow that to be changed, but still built around what was currently provided, which means it's achievable. Now, there are some papers that have been out recently, and it's really important to see these things as part of a movement. The EDSK paper is really interesting. It proposes some fairly fundamental changes. It's about an 11 to 15 strand and a 15 to 18 strand, and some interesting thinking about credits and volume sizes and how a baccalaureate could be made up of components with different credit volumes and so on. So it's almost like a prescribed model, which is quite detailed and a strong rationale, but it's worth looking at why that rationale is there. This paper from Rethinking Assessment is almost looking the opposite way. It doesn't prescribe any specific solutions, but it's saying, look at different ways that people assess. And it's not all about exams. So but they haven't sort of come up with proposals yet. They're just saying, look, across the world, in Canada and Australia and various other places, there are other ways of assessing, and some things need, we don't just need to have everyone in the hall taking a ludicrous number of written papers at 16. We just don't. But so there's two different types of approach there. We think there's both of those sort of fit into the baccalaureate thinking to some extent, but it's worth going to look at what they're saying as part of this review. One of my favorite ideas from the rethinking assessment is this, to show you that the transcripting is working. So Mastery Transcripts is a US, I think, based program. And to show you that a digital portfolio style transcript is already, the tools are already there. We could have this in England, where you log on to my transcript, you give the link to your employer or to a university or to whoever who needs it. And on it, they just open up your portfolio and they recognize it because it looks the same for everybody. What did you study? What units did you take? How many credits did you get for that? What was your project? What was your personal development program? It's totally doable. And of course, then that gives the person a kind of holistic kind of representation of themselves. I got these qualifications. I did these things. I didn't do that, but I did do this. And you can see and compare people in and around if you have to compare them. But someone could look at their transcript and think, formatively, I still haven't done enough of this. I need to progress that. I need to add credits here because I still haven't done much social studies or something. The transcript has this kind of formative element where the students can see it for goal setting to make sure their transcript is full and rich and truly represents them as a person. We could easily have that. We could have that sooner than anything in this whole discussion. So what we're asking people to do is to think about all these different questions, and I'm not going to read all these out, but the baccalaureate consultation asks you to consider lots of questions like, should our formal curriculum assessment framework go further? Should this be left to colleges to decide, or should there be a common framework? So these are the sorts of questions. Do you think a holistic national baccalaureate as outlined would be better than what we do now? And if you don't, say why. I mean, you might think, I don't like the sound of that, stick with what we've got. But tell us why you'd think that. Which of the models we present is the one you like the most? There are various alternatives that we present. And one of the key questions that is there is about this thing of, do you think we should evolve from what we've got now, put a wraparound around it, and then evolve the units inside? Or do you think we should sort of nuke it and start again? And that's an important kind of thing. So in the consultation, it looks a bit like this. It's a Google form, and you can do as much or as little as you like. You can enter a whole blurb of text because you don't fancy all the boxes. Just write it here. Just write it. You can upload. You could type something on a Word document or something you've already written and just upload it. So you can do that. And there are various sort of tick box things, just so we get some data about different things. So hopefully we've made it flexible enough to access. And the deadline for it is October, sort of mid-October. So you might want to do it now. It should be great if you can get us started so we get some responses coming, so we start our thinking. If you represent an organization, it would be good for us to know your official kind of organization's view is this, so that we can sort of start using that. If you're individual, your individual views are also really important to us. So if you're just a person who just has a personal view of this, share it, and we'll start getting a sense of the range of views. And then having set out our kind of what we feel, we'll get some responses here about whether or not there's agreement with what we're proposing. Bearing in mind it's still quite broad at this stage. So I hope that's been a useful kind of overview of what the baccalaureate could be and some of the discussions we're having, and which is really over to you now to kind of show us what you think. I'll stop the share now and hand over to David, who is, I'll let you introduce yourself, a fantastic head teacher and from the Anglo-European School in Ingatestone.
Very kind of you, Tom, to say that, but bear in mind I'm a co-head teacher.
Yeah.
I've got to be very careful because Jodie is also in this audience on my screen. For us, the notion of a National Baccalaureate for England was a very easy decision for us to take because we were formed in the white heat of the debate around our membership of the European Union in the early 70s. We are, however, a state comprehensive school of some 1,500 young people, funded or otherwise by the government and not by the European Union. And so from those early days, we adopted the International Baccalaureate, one of the pioneer schools for the IB in the state sector at that time. And from the seeds that were sown there, the IB mission and ethos and values and the learner profile has imbued our entire approach to curriculum design and wider learning. And so the way that looks at the moment is a broad curriculum at Key Stage 3. And we haven't said anything about Key Stage 3 because for us that's also a good staging post for checking progression and moving people through to another stage. And so we've conceived of the National Baccalaureate at a foundation stage there. And there, of course, we do have breadth, and we do have that broad baccalaureate education that adds up to more than the sum of its parts. But it's not just about the national curriculum subjects. For us, it's about languages, it's about citizenship, it's about visits and exchanges. In days gone by, we were sending 700 young people abroad every year and bringing them back. And obviously that's been in suspension for a while, and we desperately hope we can come back to that in the coming months. And so we have some character education in that respect, along with the extracurricular activities that all of your schools will provide. But then the difference starts to kick in at Key Stage 4, where there is no hiding place from the humanities, the arts, languages, technology, let alone maths, English, science, PE, and citizenship, all of which have a statutory status and are required at Key Stage 4. But in addition, in the world of the Anglo, the humanities, the arts, technology, and languages are also statutory. And that involves 2 languages up to the age of 16, unless there are particular reasons why a child should only do 1. And that's enriched by work experience, by the Visits and Exchanges program. We have a very rich arts provision, which has just been recognised by very pleased to receive the ArtSmart Platinum Award. So it isn't just languages, it's about that genuine breadth and enrichment. And then we come to the sixth form, where obviously that's where the International Baccalaureate kicks in as a taught programme, but as I said earlier, the ethos and that values-driven nature of the IB pervades everything that we do at all key stages. But come to sixth form, there are 2 pathways with 2 sub-pathways. One is the International Baccalaureate, where they will do the diploma, or I think Fiona mentioned this earlier, the IB career programme. Let's not forget, for some schools, it might be of interest to know that the IB also runs a middle years programme from 11 to 16, and indeed a primary years programme as well. So the one route is the International Baccalaureate route, career programme or diploma programme, but the other route is through what we might call the Anglo Baccalaureate, which is, at the moment at least, 4 A-levels or 3 A-levels plus some IB subjects which can be delivered as individual subjects. But what unifies the students in the sixth form is the CAS programme that I've seen some of you mention in the chat, creativity, activity service, a bit like the D&V model, community service, creativity, etc. Everybody in the sixth form does that. Everybody in the sixth form does a language. Therefore, everybody in the sixth form has access to the Visits and Exchanges programme. Now, okay, we're 50 in 2 years' time, so we've been able to embed this over a long period of time. But for us, when the National Baccalaureate came along, first of all, it was a great antidote to the so-called English Baccalaureate, which fundamentally is not a baccalaureate. It is a bunch of subjects that does not add up to anything more than the sum of its parts. And we were able to wrap this structure, this very flexible structure, we think, around everything we do, including GCSE, around A-level, and obviously Key Stage 3. I think we genuinely believe that if we put a bunch of teachers into a room for 24 hours, and probably a lot less, and ask them to come up with some idea of what a good education for students in England and Wales might look like, they would come up with something like this, that is broad, values-driven, outward-looking, and that, as we keep saying, adding up to more than the sum of its parts. And I also think, and some of you have mentioned the situation we're in with the lockdown and the pandemic and so on, that there is a movement embodied in some of the references that Tom has made to building back better. And I think provided, and this isn't a political comment, but provided the forces of small c conservatism don't repress the imagination and creativity that's emerging in the profession, certainly in my own professional association, ASCL, I think there is an opportunity to build back better with something like this. And why not the National Baccalaureate for England? It's a broad, flexible programme, not without its challenges, of course, but it is there for the taking. And even at this point in time, I think colleagues would support me in this, certainly the trustees, that there are schools who might be ready to give this a go as of now. But let's get through the consultation and see where the next 12 months takes us and how much we can influence the decision makers. But along with Rob in the audience, Steve, who you've heard referred to, and Jodie and myself, we're schools which have taken this opportunity, and we'll hang on in there just to see how far we can get with it and influence that debate about building that better insofar as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So, Steve, are you there?
I am here, yeah.
Right, over to you, I think, for the questions.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for taking us through the documentation so clearly. And thank you also to Fiona, David, and David for your contributions. This is the opportunity now for everyone else to get involved and have their say. So I think probably the best way is if people could raise their virtual hand. Well, I'll start my video, Tom, but I'm conscious that it might ruin my sound. But anyway, yeah, if people could raise their virtual hands, hopefully we'll be able to see them and we'll be able to get a list of people who'd like to make a contribution to this discussion. So is there anybody who wants to respond to what they've heard so far?
Steve, Rachel Smith has got her real hand up.
Oh, is she? Okay, I can't see that. Okay, thank you, Rob. Rachel, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I can't for some reason find the hand to put up. I just wanted to say I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea, all of this. I work in a grammar school and have done for 7 years, but the rest of my life has been in the real world, and I brought a lot of the real world to the life that I have now. And I think that if we can pull this together in a way that will, because we're only as strong as the weakest person, aren't we? So if we can pull this in a way where the students realise that a level 1 baccalaureate will be still as worthwhile, and that universities will see that at the highest level too. Because when I used to teach the IB at a different school, there was always a problem because they didn't think that the IB had the same equivalence. Now that was a few years ago. So what I'd like to do is to find out how we can have the teachers and the parents believe in it. And I think that has to come also from employers. I don't think we can do this on our own. We need the people who take our students as a result of the baccalaureate to value it and to say why they want it. The same as the personal development. Everyone in business is always talking about all the skills that they need, but actually the closest we've got to ever recognising it is, dare I say it, through Ofsted with the personal development aspect. So it's got, all these things are important to us and to our students, but not unless the outside world then values them. So that's where I see it coming. And my only other worry is about languages, because it's really hard in very challenging schools to teach some languages, and how we could work that through to make things acceptable for children, and then not lose out if they don't have the teachers or they don't have the interest.
Yes, thank you very much, Rachel. Anybody want to come back on anything that she said, or raise any other points?
I wouldn't mind just commenting on the sort of the process I imagine. So I think one of the policy change issues is around the acceptability, and that's why I feel like we need to be so careful about the kind of scrap GCSEs kind of language, because the truth is that it is the thing which people trust and know, and anything which might seem to be weakening that or taking, like, you only have to see in a family where when the transition from A star to G, then move to grade 1 to 9, people thinking, is it the same? What am I going to get? And comparativity, people will care about that. So if we can project the baccalaureate as having at least the same as the GCSE and A-level and validity now, but it's adding more sort of components to it and making it broader initially, so the baccalaureate as an idea establishes itself, then we might get the buy-in to say, now the baccalaureate exists and is highly valued with a transcript and so on. Maybe we can start saying, you know, you don't need so many of those GCSE bits there. We could just focus more on what happens here, and it will evolve. That's the way I view it. I mean, other people are more confident that we could do that, but that's why we want to get people's views. But I think that careful buy-in from parents, which will be what policymakers will care about. I mean, it is a truth that politicians really care more about parents than teachers. And so we need to, if they think that parents won't like it, they won't do it. And so we do need to build that carefully, I think. It's a really good point.
Thank you, Tom. Does anybody else want to get involved?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi,
yes.
Sorry to jump in.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah, a couple of things. I work in an IB school in the southeast. I think this sounds absolutely fantastic. And I just want to say a couple of things really is that we are an IB DP school. And one of the things we found, we have found for quite some time is we still do GCSEs. But the mindset and the dispositions that the GCSE package encourages haven't been hitherto very conducive to the kind of holistic aims of the IBDP. And so a few years ago, we introduced what we've called our middle school diploma, which continues with the GCSEs, but expects of students to engage in a range of different kinds of extracurricular / service activities. And it's partly just to get them to do things, but it's also to encourage them to think and reflect about the importance of those activities in terms of how they learn through them. So a big part of it is to kind of get them to reflect on the nature of how they learn, to develop self-awareness, to develop recognition of kind of collaboration and interpersonal skills and compassion and sensitivity and things like that. And we found it's made a real difference. And so they moved through the 5 years, having been kind of prepped and developed, you know, in those kinds of ways. And when we present it to the parents, and we continue to present it to the parents, they're fully supportive of it, because many of them work in, you know, obviously in different kinds of professions. But when you start talking about the value of the kinds of range of personal characteristics that we think are important, and we highlight things like creativity, self-awareness, independent learning, being responsible, being compassionate, having integrity, and so on. It's almost self-evident that those are good things for us. And in the workplace, they register themselves quite profoundly. So we found incredible support from parents, and a real range of parents who gave us their views. So we're quite excited by it. And I think the idea of an ideological kind of framework that wraps up varieties of assessment models in the way that, you know, you've described, Tom, it seems to me really interesting and exciting. So I'm quite inspired by what's being discussed.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. Does anybody else want to have a say at this point? See lots of comments coming in on the chat, which is good to see. One of the things I'll just say, as Tom mentioned earlier, is that the schools I've been working in have developed a version of their own version of the Priory Bac over the last few years. And when we've had to meet with some of the students to discuss the things that they've done as part of their projects, and in fact Tom came to see some of these, the things that you find out that they've been involved in is absolutely mind-blowing quite often. And I remember we talked to some year 8s, or I think they were year 8s, in one of the schools in Grantham, and one of the students had been involved in an archaeological dig with his father in Turkey, and had been involved in had ended up in the National Museum of Turkey in Ankara. And the fact that the school was giving him an opportunity to talk about that and valuing that experience that he was having outside school and incorporating it and into the work that the school did alongside him, and seeing it all as one thing really seemed like a really powerful way of getting parents and students and all together and working towards the same aim really. And I think that with a lot of, you don't get that with every student by any means, but you get it with enough, I think, to make it really, really worthwhile.
I think you're breaking up a bit there, Steve. But yeah, I think a lot of people, and David alluded to this as well, that some of the people that we worked with over the last few years have been primary schools, even where the baccalaureate notion applies at Key Stage 2. And as David was saying, the Key Stage 3 provides the platform for the Key Stage 4 and 5, obviously. So there's huge benefits here to even this whole notion of a baccalaureate kind of curriculum mindset, where we talk about the holistic student and the elements within it. And when you just, the GCSE kind of structural roadblock at the moment that we have, once that gets freed up, so many other things become possible. And I think that's really great. That idea of a personal project is valid at Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, all the way through. You could do several of them. There's a question in here about, for example, a discussion about languages, and that's come up a few times. And one of the things that we've asked during the consultation is, which elements do you think ought to be compulsory? And in the EDSK, for example, they're very clear about these are the things that should be in the baccalaureate as a proposal. We're asking you what you think ought to be compulsory. You know, do you think certain things should be universal for everybody, even English and maths are up for discussion? To what extent should everyone do a language all the way through until what age? And once you have a baccalaureate established, these discussions about the components of the baccalaureate are easy to have, because we're saying we have our baccalaureate, right? To what extent do we mandate what's in it? And different governments over time could discuss what's mandatory in the baccalaureate. But the idea of the baccalaureate itself could be there forever. It's just about what's in it that could be up for discussion. And for us, that's kind of the chicken and egg situation. If you over worry about whether or not to have a bac, you don't even allow yourself the possibility to have these other discussions. But once you've got the baccalaureate and there it is, there's much less pressure on each of these other discussions about whether everyone should do a language or how much arts everyone should do. It's just the framework is there to hold all manner of possible pathways. I'll hand back to you, Steve. I'm not sure. I'll take further questions. You're breaking up, but I'm not sure if you're there at all now.
Fiona, did you want to?
I'm still here.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I was just interested in, you know, given that making any sort of political change, you have to get the consumers on side, and several people have referred to parents. And I wondered what others who aren't on the trust, who are in the audience here, as it were, think about the extent to which there is a hunger amongst parents, and what is, you know, if some of the language is quite technical, and what we could possibly do to make it more accessible to the families and the young people who we think would benefit from it.
Can I say, I think in response to that, the type of parents I deal with now, their only interest is what is in it for their children for the next step. And I think on a continuum, that's the same for any parent who is engaged in any way in education. So I think that it's very much, that there's two prongs to it. How will that benefit my child that has an EHCP and can't access education in the same way, or how is it if my child wants to go off and go through Oxbridge? And I think that's what it's about. It's how it is, and for them it will be about the next steps in the career, which is why I said in the chat, I think again it's engaging people, employers, big employers particularly, that most people will respond to say, yes, this would be really what we want. You know, the CBI say that these are all the things that we want, these are the things, and we will value it more. And then maybe in adverts for recruitment and everything, you know, baccalaureate is recognised as a strong, would have a great impact and a more chance of interview type of thing. That's very clumsily put. But everything that we do in schools, in theory, is about developing the child. But actually, it's also about selling what we're doing for the next level. So I do think with it, there's a job of worth to be doing. But if children go on and get a job from it, I think then it will make a lot of difference.
Steve, would you mind if I just come in?
No, go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, I've sadly got to leave in a minute. I'm also a school that's been working with the Baccalaureate Trust for a little while and trying to develop this sort of approach at our local level. I'm in a school head of a school in Oxfordshire. And I know that perhaps a meeting like this, as well as contributing to the consultation, which I think is crucial in order to enact change, but if there are particular schools who are interested almost in sort of capturing the moment and beginning to talk together a little bit more wider than the small group within the trust, I would definitely be very keen to hear from you, you know, tomorrow, as it were, to start talking about some of these things and find out what we're each doing at school level, because that's another good way from the ground up to share strategies and ideas. So if anyone's listening that also would be interested in, you know, just talking school to school while we develop the consultation, the response, please do get in touch. I put my email in the chat, but please do get in touch with us, and we'd be very keen to hear from you, because I think a lot of schools are thinking the same way, but we're just not all working together.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. I'm conscious that a number of people have already had to leave a little bit early, so I'm wondering whether, and if my people are saying anyway very well, I'm wondering if it's a good time to start to wind up. Are there any other points that people want to make before we do that?
David's got his hand up.
Has he?
Yeah.
David. Are you there, David?
Which David?
Presumably not you.
David Towell, you're muted. David Towell, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I'm okay. That's okay. Sorry, it was just in response to Rachel's point about engaging employers. And one of the discussions we had, Rachel, quite early on was how we would validate the baccalaureate. And we looked at a system of local validation with employers and local universities, and also a national form of validation with national employers and a group of universities, and also a group of people who would be involved as validating the process within the schools. I think very early days with us, but I think your point about engaging local groups is absolutely critical for quite a number of youngsters who might wish to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
I'm sorry, I'm going to say one more thing. I apologise, but once I get going, I'm terrible. I just want to say I think it's heartwarming to know that we would talk to children as well, because I think they're much cleverer than most of us in terms of seeing a journey through. And once you present them with something, then their feedback as well, I think, is vital. So if ever you want to do that, then I'm sure my school, I'm in Buckinghamshire, I'd be very happy to be involved in that.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. It'd be great if some of the schools involved today could put together groups of students who could maybe arrange to contribute to the consultation, that would be really helpful. I'm assuming people can still hear what I'm saying. I'm interested to, I think that what Valerie Hannon says in her 2017 book, Thrive, she talks about schools being judged against a wider set of outcomes than just academic ones. And I think that there's a survival imperative here. We need to move from just thinking about academic outcomes of education in a way that I think is parallel to the move to look at beyond GDP as a measure of how society develops that Tim Burgess outlines in his recent book, Post-Growth. And in the book Thrive, I just want to read a couple of sentences. I hope it doesn't break up too much. She says, a serious debate is required about how to support schools to evidence and communicate this wider range of outcomes, one that needs to involve learners and their families, employers and civil society, as well as the professions directly involved in education. This debate also needs politicians with the bravery to go beyond the usual cliches about what schools are for and give schools the support and accountability structures to achieve a better balance across the goals of education. We have to find ways to harness education to the project of our collective and individual thriving. Reinvented schools are critical to this process, but let's create the conditions where it can happen at scale rather than as rare exceptions. It feels to me that the National Baccalaureate can help to create these conditions, and that this consultation could be a key aspect of the debate that Hannon's referring to here. So it'd be really good if people can contribute to the consultation, and we can get a really powerful set of ideas that we can take forward into the report early next year. Is there anybody else who'd like to say anything else before we close?
I just want to encourage people to do the consultation.
Yes.
There's always an attrition rate, people are interested, but the more responses we get, the more we can genuinely say what people think. And I can't, and good intentions are good, but if the link is in the chat here. If you've had this Zoom link to join this, it would be in the same place as that. So please do add your thoughts, and the more the merrier.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you everybody else who's contributed today. Yes, as we said, the link to the consultation is on page 2 of the documents. You'll find it there, and you'll find it in lots of other places. We'll be tweeting it, and it'll be widely available. So please do read the document and contribute to the consultation, and get as many other people that you know to do the same. The deadline, as we said, is the 15th of October. We'll then start having a look at what people have said, and we'll have another of these meetings in November 2021. I think it says 22 on the timeline, but we do mean autumn 21. And with the result of the report being published in January 22. And obviously, the more people who contribute, the more powerful that report will be. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody and we look forward to reading what you've got to say about this. Thank you.